Hello, I'm Frank of Future and welcome to the Vanguard of Light. And today we're going to be talking about transforming negative thoughts into positive thoughts and ways to do that. And I'm going to start it off with a story about a lady I know, or at least I imagine that I know, named Janice and her kayaking adventures, her extreme kayaking adventures. But one thing, the thing with imagination, one, it's malleable, and two, it could be a double-edged sword, and you're gonna learn more about that with Jack and the bill that'll never go away. But that's a different video altogether. Let's get back to Janice. So Janice wanted to be a really good kayaker, right? She did a lot of training, and she heard about this one river, like, you know, all the really good kayakers would do and stuff like that. So she's kayaking that river, and eventually she's hearing like kind of that loud noise of a waterfall, and the waters are picking up, and it's starting to get a little kind of crazy out there. And lo and behold, like, she's coming up to the waterfall, and it was a big one, right? And she's thinking like, oh, I'm gonna get this, right? And she proceeds to go over the waterfall and gets very much injured. Like, she just gets really hurt. It was a sad thing. But she's like, I'm gonna come back. I'm gonna come back to this. You know, I'm gonna be so much stronger this next time, and I'm gonna beat that river this time, and I'm gonna get it. You know, it's like, it's not gonna get me this time. It's not, you know, this is what I'm gonna do, right? So she ends up recovering, and she like starts really training, really getting strong. Cause she's like, I got to do that. You know, badass kayakers do this. I have to do this, right? So she's paddling, right? And she's coming up to that spot where, you know, it's starting to get loud. The river's getting really strong. And she's thinking like, okay, well, maybe I don't go over the waterfall. Maybe that was the mistake. But there's like an inlet, like where she could pull over, like before the waterfall. And she's thinking like, okay, I'm going to hit that. I'm going to get that. Now she's paddling, but it's like the water pulls her back into the middle. Like it's just pulling her, like just to go over the waterfall. And she's trying to paddle to get, you know, to get to that part. But there's just no hope. I mean, she's kind of like even going this way and paddling as hard as she can, and just gets sucked over the waterfall once again, gets really injured, right? And she's committed, and she's like, there's gotta be something wrong with me. It's like, why? You know, because she sees other people doing it or hears about them and sees them downriver, and it's like, what is going on? So she kind of re-steels herself. She recovers from all her injuries, which take a long time, and she's really doubling down on like the working out and getting herself strong enough, because she's like, okay, my problem was I wasn't strong enough to, like, you know, get there. Like the current was too strong or something like that. So lo and behold, she's back on that river again. She's been training. She's coming at that moment. She's like, okay, I'm staying kind of close to the riverbank. She's like, okay, I'm gonna make that. I'm gonna pull off right past, like just before the waterfall. Like it's going over, and it's like a little pull off right before. And she's thinking, okay, that's what they must do. They must not go over the waterfall, because I can't see how anybody would survive that, like be able to do that easily. So it must be that's where that little inlet, right? So once again, she gets there, and she's a lot stronger, and she's getting close to being able to pull over. But she gets sucked back over the falls again. And now she's kind of just like, she's really, I mean, it's the third time she's gone over. It's been super painful, and she's kind of feeling like, maybe I'm going to give up on this kayak dream, or, you know, being really good at kayaking, because she can't do it again. She's like, I can't do it again. You know, I trained so hard. I was so strong, and like, there's got to be something wrong with me. Like, how could I not, you know, beat this river? You know, all these other people are doing it, and it seems like I've like trained harder than them, and like, why can't I do it? You know, what's wrong with me? But she's also kind of defeated, like, I'm not going to do this again, because that hurts so bad. So she does recover, you know, so, and she's coming back, and but she's still like, I'm not going to do this river. And she ends up going to this place, because she's a little bit of a loner, but she goes to this place like where all the kayak people would hang out and talk about, you know, going over, you know, doing the river and completing it. And she ends up talking to this one guy, and they're kind of going back and forth. And she was just saying, like, find out that, like, oh yeah, I did the river, and, you know, it wasn't too bad. And she's like, man, she's like, yeah, I tried to do it, but man, after the third time going over the falls, I just can't do it anymore. I can't go for it. And he's like, wait, what do you mean go over the falls? He's like, oh yeah, that river, you know, when you get that part with the falls. And he's like, what? You went over the falls? And she's like, well, yeah. She's like, yeah, I couldn't do that little inlet. I mean, the first time I made a mistake, I thought everybody went over the falls. But then I realized you have to take that little inlet right by the edge of the falls. And the guy's like, wait, what? You went over the falls 3 times and you're still here? Are you kidding me? You must be the best kayaker ever. And she's like, what are you talking about? I couldn't even do the river like all you guys did. I couldn't even get to that inlet. And he's like, no one does that. She's like, what are you talking about? She's like, everybody pulls off way up ahead. You can't, no one could pull over at that spot, and you're definitely go over the falls. No one does that. We stop way, way, way upriver, pull out, and then we walk past the falls and then continue on. No one gets even near those falls. Those are way too strong. And she's like, bing, like, oh my gosh, no one does that, right? And so that story is to illustrate kind of with negative thoughts, right? If you're coming to the falls and they've built up and built up and built up and built up, and it's got all that force behind them, we all get taken. We all go over the falls. We all can't like just short circuit at the last moment, like you're about to explode and it's like, oh, just short circuit it. And that's not the time to short circuit the negative thoughts. Is to get them when they're small, way upstream, where you can kind of see them happening and you're like, oh, wait, okay, let me paddle off stream. Let me start handling them when they're smaller, and give yourself a little bit of grace of like, if it's a full-on storm, no, you're most likely going to go over the falls, and that's not when people are stopping it. You know, the people that you see that are happy and aren't consumed by negative thoughts, it's not because they're stopping them just before they're going over the falls because they've all built up. It's because you're catching them way, way, way upstream. So to give you a couple little tips on that is, one, you got to start paying attention to what's going on in here, because there's multiple ways in which kind of like that negative thought can happen. One of them could be if entities are attached to you and they're just kind of like doing their thing. There's also like traumatized parts, and they're kind of also in this loop. But there is a malevolent force which will pump in negative thoughts. And the way to summit those is not when it's been doing it and it's got you all worked up and you're in a frenzy, is to really start catching them way, way, way upstream. And one of the ways you do that is like you hear the thought and then add to it of like, oh, this is always going to be like this, or it will never work out, or whatever it's done. Like kind of amplify it with an always, a never, and permanently. And then you can kind of get an idea of the thought, 'cause it's trying to creep it in with like a little thing of like, oh, well, you're not good at that. Just translate that like, okay, I'm not good at that. I'm always not going to be good at that. And then I'll magnify it of like, oh, wait a second, to help you really catch that, where that thought is trying to go, where that's trying to take you down to the river to where you get to the falls, and it's built up so much thing of like, I can never. And then all of a sudden you're going over the falls. First, you just get that little bit of like, it's just like, oh, well, you're not good enough here. You're not this, you're not that. And then you just translate that like, okay, so you're saying I'm this way. Okay, I'm gonna add an always to it. I'm always that way. And that helps you push it back of like, whoa, when you blow it up big, you're like, wait a second, I'm not always that way. But if you let that keep talking to you, ooh, that's when it feels like it is an always, you know, or it feels like it's, oh, you're never gonna get that. And it feels like a never. And once it's fully consumed you to where it feels like a never, feels like an always, we tend to go over the falls in that analogy with Janice. But we catch it before it's become an always. By adding that on there, we add the always. Oh, I'm always gonna be this way. Because that'll help you battle it to where you'd be like, no, you know, when you're a little more calm, of like, you're like, well, you can't do that. It's like, okay, I'll never be able to do that. And you're like, wait a second, that's not true. It's not a never. And that's the way in which you can start catching them way, way upstream. I mean, first you want to just start paying attention to the thoughts, but then also start catching them sooner, catching them when they're small. And then you can start confronting them when they're small and not let them accumulate to where it does feel like it's always going to be that way. I'm never going to get that. And that's kind of where we end up going over the falls. That's the first. Number one tip is start catching them small. You can catch them with the always, never, it's permanent, because that helps highlight of like, it looks like it's just a little drip. We got to know where that drip's taking us. It's taking us to the falls, and we're going to short circuit it way back there. So hope you like this video. We got more coming where you're gonna find out about Jack with the bill that never goes away, which is another way in which you can start turning the negative thoughts into positive thoughts. Also, if you want to check out my course, Freedom Through Safety, where we really go in deep on these thoughts, is one of the big parts and where they come from. Like I talk about, there's this death program where your unconscious is like, okay, we cannot go there. And your unconscious will do a lot to not let you go to that place. It sucks when your goal is inside one of those death programs. And that's where you can get a lot of those negative thoughts. Like I also said, with entities, they can create that. And then also traumatized parts. And those are all the parts that are on your plate to deal with versus that dark force. That's the part where we're catching on this one. Of like, if it's a dark force, you know, another tactic you can use is ask it, what is my next step to correct that? And you'll find that that voice goes away. When you're saying like, oh, well, you can never do this. Like, okay, what's my first action step I can take to start being able to do it? You'll notice that voice, like you'll notice from what location it's coming from, you'll notice it won't keep talking. It's not going to give you a hint because its purpose, like I said, it's a malevolent force, is just to stop you, just to hold you back. But that's why we're confronting them. We're also, when it gives us a little drip seed, because it's trying to take you over the falls, it gives a little drip. We're just going to add always or never. It's permanent. So it really highlights of like, hey, wait a second. This thought is negative, like highly negative. Like if I let this grow to where it becomes an always or a never, it's going to take us out, or if it's permanent. So this is how we catch them when they're early, because we want to catch them way, way upstream, or you're going to find yourself like Janice, going over the falls. And you don't want to get beat up where you've gone over the falls too much to where you don't even want to, you know, stop those negative thoughts. So hopefully that's helped. Until we talk again, have a blessed day or a blessed night.